Hello, my fellow Americans. 'Tis I, the Rumpled One. Normally, I just do a book review. But this book, Currency Wars, The Making of the Next Global Crisis, by James Rickards, I want to speak to you, American to American. You really should read this book, but be warned. When you read this book, it's going to probably make it easy for you to choose to be upset at what our government has done and what our government is doing. But you're probably already upset with that, with Obamacare and the rest of the nonsense. So let me just jump in. I've got a bunch of quotes because this is some information. Even if you don't read the book, you need to hear this, in my opinion, because it's going to educate you. It's going to expand your world. And you see, once you open that door to knowledge, you can't go back to being ignorant. Page 28. And this is for my fellow traders. OD was right. A trader could have the best trading idea ever, but losing money on a trade is nature's way of telling you something's wrong. The best traders always got out of a losing trade, cut their losses, and sit back looking for the next good opportunity. It would always come around eventually. Bad traders would rationalize the loss, assume the market didn't understand how smart they were, put on more of the trade in larger side, in effect doubling down, and usually go on to lose money until some senior risk manager forced them out of the position. Whatever the strategy, it was the price signals that kept traders honest and gave traders the market feedback needed to validate their theories. Now, what's that have to do with you, my fellow American? Well, you know what happened in the banking bubble with all these different derivatives and things, that these guys were making these bets that were just so huge that when they went against them, they got wiped out. They weren't using good management. And you see, in your personal life, you need to use that same good management. You don't go buying houses that you can't afford. You don't put on mortgages that are worth more than the property, or you're going to get wiped out too. Page 71 coming up. A prohibition on the hoarding or possession of gold was integral to the plan to devalue the dollar against gold and get people spending again. Against this background, FDR issued Executive Order 6102 on April 5, 1933, one of the most extraordinary executive orders in U.S. history. The blunt language over the signature of Franklin Delano Roosevelt speaks for itself. I, Franklin D. Roosevelt, declare that a national emergency continues to exist and do hereby prohibit the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates within the United States by individuals, partnerships, associations, and corporations. All persons are hereby required to deliver on or before May 1st, 1933, to a Federal Reserve Bank or to any member of the Federal Reserve System all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates now owned by them. Whoever willfully violates any provision of this executive order may be fined not more than $10,000 or may be imprisoned for not more than 10 years. This happened in the U.S. of A. It's history. It's fact. In the land of the free, that the government, with the stroke of a pen, takes away that which you earned, that which you worked for, fought for. And don't think it can't happen again with President Obama. You don't think those executive orders haven't already been drafted? Guess again. Page 72. In a rapid sequence of moves, FDR had deftly confiscated private gold, banned its export abroad, and captured the gold mining industry. As a result, Roosevelt greatly increased the U.S. hoard of official gold. Contemporary estimates were that the citizens surrendered over 500 metric tons of gold to the Treasury in 1933. The gold depository at Fort Knox was constructed in 1937 for the specific purpose of holding the gold that had been confiscated from U.S. citizens. There was no longer enough room in the basement of the Treasury. You see that? Gold taken from U.S. citizens. And how did that happen? Stroke of a pen. Why did it happen? Because the government has the force, the power that they get through us, from us, via our tax money, to build armies, build prisons, to enslave we, the people. That's why I said, my fellow Americans, this book has the capacity or the ability to make it easy for you to choose to get really ticked off. Page 108. A relatively small redemption, say $100 billion of Treasury notes done in early 2008 when gold was about $1,000 per ounce, would have equaled 100 million ounces of gold, or about 2,840 metric tons. This amounts to the 35% of the entire official gold supply of the United States. Indeed, a full redemption of all U.S. government securities by China would have wiped out the U.S. gold supply completely and left the United States with no gold, and China the proud owner of over 9,000 metric tons. One can imagine Chinese naval vessels arriving in New York Harbor and a heavily armed U.S. Army convoy moving south down the Palisades Interstate Parkway from West Point to meet the vessels and load the gold on board for shipment to newly constructed vaults in Shanghai. No doubt such a scene would have been shocking to the American people, yet that imagined shock proves a larger point. America has in fact run trade deficits large enough to wipe out its gold hoard under the old rules of the game. Still, the idea of the gold standard was not to deplete nations of gold, but rather to force them to get their financial house in order long before the gold disappeared. In the absence of a gold standard and the real-time adjustment it causes, the American people seem unaware of how badly U.S. finances have actually deteriorated. Let that sink in for a moment. Another country could come in and demand our gold. Just think about that. Page 111. When the recession of 2007 began, America was still working off this high base of unemployed, and the total number skyrocketed to over 15.6 million unemployed by October 2009. Including those employed part-time but seeking longer hours and those not officially unemployed but desiring a job, the total number of unemployed and underemployed Americans at the end of 2009 stood at over 25 million men and women. Every one of these 25 million Americans has a face, a name, and a family. In our statistical age, economists prefer to present this phenomenon in percentage terms, such as 6% unemployment for year-end 2002 and 9.9% for 2009. But reciting the actual numbers of affected persons, more than 25 million, helps bring home the depth of the employment problem America desperately needed to create jobs. I'm not telling you something you don't already know. You can look in your own neighborhood, your own town, and see how many people are looking for work and can't find it. And this has been going on for years. Page 130. One reason the Chinese did not consume more was that their social safety net was weak. So individuals saved excessively to pay for their own retirement and health care. Another factor working against Chinese consumption was a millennia-old Confucian culture that discouraged ostentatious displays of wealth. Yet U.S. policymakers were not looking for a pro-spending cultural revolution. Something more modest would suffice. Just a few percentage points of increase in consumption by China in favor of U.S. exports could allow the United States to ignite a self-sustaining recovery. But you see, in China, People know you got to take care of yourselves because the government's not going to take care of you. That's something, it used to be that way here, not too long ago. Page 134. Quantitative easing in its simplest form is just printing money. To create money from thin air, the Federal Reserve buys Treasury debt securities from a select group of banks called primary dealers. The primary dealers have a global base of customers ranging from sovereign wealth funds, other central banks, pension funds, and institutional investors to high net worth individuals. The dealers act as intermediaries between the Fed and the marketplace by underwriting Treasury auctions of new debt and making a market in existing debt. When the Fed wants to reduce the money supply, they sell securities to the primary dealers. The securities go to the dealers and the money paid to the Fed simply disappears. Conversely, when the Fed wants to increase the money supply, they buy securities from the dealers. The Fed takes delivery of the securities and pays the dealers with freshly printed money. The money goes into the dealers' bank accounts where it can then support even more money creation by the banking system. This buying and selling of securities between the Fed and the primary dealers is the main form of open market operations. The usual purpose of open market operations is to control short-term interest rates, which the Fed typically does by buying or selling the shortest maturity Treasury securities, instruments such as T-bills maturing in 30 days. But what happens when interest rates in the shortest maturities are already zero and the Fed wants to provide additional monetary ease? Instead of buying very short maturities, the Fed can buy Treasury notes with intermediate maturities of 5, 7, or 10 years. The 10-year note is in particular is the benchmark used to price mortgages and corporate debt. By buying intermediate term debt, the Fed could provide lower interest rates for home buyers and corporate buyers to hopefully stimulate more economic activity. At least this was the conventional theory. You see, theory, not fact, theory. These eggheads at the Fed and the World Banks and IMF all have these theories, but the reality is none of this stuff works in real life. It's all been a dismal failure. Let us move on. Page 145. The value of a nation's currency is its Achilles heel. If the currency collapses, everything else goes with it. While markets today are linked through complex trading strategies, most still remain discrete to some extent. The stock market can crash, yet the bond market may rally at the same time. The bond market may crash due to rising interest rates, yet other markets in commodities, including gold and oil, might hit new highs as a result. There is always a way to make money in one market while another market is falling out of bed. However, stocks, bonds, commodities, derivatives, and other investments are all priced in a nation's currency. If you destroy the currency, you destroy all markets and the nation. This is why the currency itself is the ultimate target in any financial war. Let that sink in for a minute. Let's move on to page 170. From its creation in 1913, the most important Fed mandate has been to maintain the purchasing power of the dollar. However, since 1913, the dollar has lost over 95% of its value. Put differently, it takes $20 today to buy what $1 would buy in 1913. Imagine an investment manager losing 95% of a client's money to get a sense of how effectively the Fed has performed its primary task. Let me read that first part again. From its creation in 1913, the most important Fed mandate has been to maintain the purchasing power of the dollar. However, since 1913, the dollar has lost over 95% of its value. Maybe now you might understand why Ron Paul and a lot of others want to get rid of the Fed. Let that sink in. Okay, page 184. Keynesian theory says that the government can step in and spend money that individuals cannot or will not spend, thereby increasing aggregate demand. The government spending can reverse the slide and contribute to renewed economic growth. The problem with this theory of government spending to boost aggregate demand is that governments have no money of their own in the first instance. Governments have to print the money, take the money in form of taxes, or borrow the money from their citizens or from abroad. Ponder that. Moving on. Page 188. Because debt and deficits are now so large, the United States has run out of dry powder. If the United States were struck by another financial crisis or natural disaster of the magnitude of Hurricane Katrina or greater, its ability to resort to deficit spending would be impaired. If the United States were confronted with a major war in the Middle East or East Asia, it would not have the financial wherewithal to support a war effort as it has done in World War II. Vulnerability to foreign creditors is now complete. In the face of any one of these crises, financial, natural, or military, the United States would be forced to resort to emergency measures, as had FDR in 1933 and Nixon in 1971. Bank closings, gold seizures, import tariffs, and capital controls would be on the table. America's infatuation with the Keynesian illustration has now resulted in U.S. power being an illusion. America can only hope that nothing bad happens, yet given the course of events in the world, that seems a slim reed on which to lean. Are you starting to understand? Are you starting to get the big picture here, my fellow Americans? I really and truly hope so. Page 189. I like this one. University biologists working with infectious viruses have airtight facilities to ensure that the objects of their study do not escape from the laboratory and damage the population at large. Unfortunately, no such safeguards are imposed on economics departments. For every brilliant insight, there are some dangerous misconceptions that have infected the world's financial bloodstream and caused incalculable harm. None of these ideas have done more harm than the twin toxins of financial economics known as efficient markets and the normal distribution of risk. Fellow traders, you probably understand those. But the point I like to say is that these biologists, they got to stay within that hot zone area that's got all sealed airtight and everything. But the economists, they get to run amok in the general population, and they just spread their disease from person to person. And these government officials aren't bright enough to understand it. In fact, they rely on these people to help them make decisions. Well, now you see why the bubble burst. Now you see why we have bubbles in the first place. Moving on. Page 194. The entire system of fiscal policy, monetary policy, banking and risk management was intellectually corrupt and dishonest, and the flaws persist to this day. We all know that. Wall Street's crooked, the Fed's crooked, the Congress is crooked, they're all crooked. But we the people, I guess we're just too busy to take note, pay attention, do anything about it. Okay, we're winding down here. Page 212. Based on theoretical scaling metrics, the next collapse will not be stopped by governments because it will be larger than governments. The 5-meter seawall will face the 10-meter tsunami and the wall will fall. It's that serious, my fellow Americans. It truly is. Page 221. Over time, and with increasing complexity, returns on investment in society begin to level off and turn negative. Once the easy irrigation projects are completed, society begins progressively larger products covering longer conduits with progressively smaller amounts of water produced. Bureaucracies that started out as efficient organizations turn into inefficient obstacles to improvement, more concerned with their own perpetuation than with service to society. Elites who manage the institutions of society slowly become more concerned with their own share of a shrinking pie than with the welfare of society as a whole. The elite echelons of society go from leading to leeching. Elites behave like parasites on the host body of society and engage in what economists call rent-seeking, or the accumulation of wealth through non-productive means. Postmodern finance being one example. You see, that's why they put Obamacare on me and you, but the president and Congress and some others are exempt from it. But you knew that. Okay, we're almost done here. I hope you're still with me. Page 235. Gold is not a commodity. Gold is not an investment. Gold is money par excellence. It is truly scarce. All the gold ever produced in history would fit in a cube of 20 meters, about 60 feet on each side, approximately the size of a small suburban office building. The supply of gold from new mining expands at a fairly slow and predictable pace, about 1.5% per year. This is far too slow to permit much inflation. In fact, a mild persistent deflation would be the most likely outcome under a gold standard. But that was news to me. In fact, I had to Google it. But 60 feet by 60 feet by 60 feet, all the gold ever produced in the world. Now, there's some disagreement to this, but it's still kind of mind-boggling that that's all the gold. Okay, here's the last quote. The history of central banking in general has been one of broken promises when it comes to the convertibility of money into gold, while the history of central banking in the United States in particular has been one of promoting banking interests at the expense of the general interest. Given this history and the adversarial relationship between central banks and citizens, how can the requisite trust be engendered? So you see, my fellow Americans, Currency Wars, The Making of the Next Global Crisis by James Rickards is a book I highly suggest you read, you study. If you don't understand anything in the book, Google it. The information's out there. This needs to be taught. This needs to be taught to your children and your children's children if we're going to have any hope as a country. My fellow Americans, wake up and smell the tyranny.